Welcome back everyone dito sa latest episode ng Marxism and Marcos. Let's go to the latest developments in the country. Now, we not only have a sociologist, a historian, we also have a lawyer with us. Kasi kailangan, baka makasuhan na naman tayo. 2 out of 3 here, may mga kaso na. Thanks, Attorney Star, for helping.
Ako ba susunod?
Hopefully not. Keep safe.
Okay.
We take care of you. Unless you're Ronald Llamas and no one bothers to file a case against you because it's more trouble than that. No, but I want to pick up where we left up, Walden, because eventually we're going to discuss the upcoming list by the Ombudsman. I think that everyone is looking forward to who will not be on the list because as we speak, mukhang may mga negosasyon. Sinong nandyan, sinong walang dyan, lalo na yung mga favorite mong senador, mga other nakakataas kilay.
Sino ba pinag-usapan natin dito?
So, Walden, we're talking about the issue of corruption dun sa introductory episode natin ng parang framework. Anong framework? Ano ba ang Pilipinas? Feudal ba tayo? Capitalista ba tayo? Post-capitalist ba tayo? Sustainable ba tayo? Ano ba talaga nangyari? Walden, I would say you're really the OG of this, which is corruption is evil. Yes, you go to hell for it. But you're just really scratching the surface if you just focus on the issue of corruption. There are more fundamental causes for this. What is a lesson from neighboring countries? We ended on China in the previous episode. In fact, Yuan Ang, who I always quote, a good friend of ours from Johns Hopkins, she used the term corrupt meritocracy. Like you get competent people to create growth, but they're also corrupt. I mean, that's China, right? But we have versions of that in Vietnam, your favorite country. How many of their presidents recently were purged? Although I know there's politics involved, etc. But nevertheless, there is corruption in Vietnam. Massive corruption in Korea until today. Kaya nga natanggal si Park Yung-hee. Can it give us a global perspective, Walden? Because yun yung wala sa atin eh. We always compare ourselves to Norway and Swedens of this world. I really don't understand why.
Or Singapore.
But even Sweden and Norway had corruption scandals once upon a time, right?
Yeah.
But let's just go in our own neighborhood. What do we learn about corruption and poverty? What is the correlation between the two, if any at all, Walden, from your studies?
Well, the first thing I would say is, up till around, I would say, 10 years ago, the paragon of corruption in Asia was Indonesia. Okay, the Western agencies would always complain that, of course, not only Indonesia, but of course the Philippines and Thailand, Malaysia even, were ridden with corruption. And of course, people were puzzled about why there was great corruption in Korea, and yet it was a tiger economy. And the two exceptions were, they attributed it to different factors. Were Hong Kong, and of course there was a racist thing to that. It's because the British, held the thing in line, and of course Singapore,
Which is also the British Confucian,
the British,
similar argument.
But I think more important is Lee Kuan Yew. Unfortunately, people always forgot all about the other neighboring countries except Singapore.
Yeah.
And they would say that, oh my God, if could only be like Singapore, which was, I think, had exceptional circumstances.
And it's a city-state. It's a city with no rural area, with no rural-urban divides, all of those things.
Yeah, definitely. So, basically, I mean, I think that once you broaden it to Southeast Asia and to globally, you begin to see that you have so many corruption-ridden societies that produce developmental states, and of course, as I said earlier, where else can we see the coexistence of massive corruption and high-growth developmentalism and poverty reduction to almost nothing, according to the World Bank, than China.
650 million lifted out of poverty.
I mean, of course, there are parts of the government which are under Xi Jinping that are the ones who discipline the corrupt. And if corruption begins to get out of hand, Xi Jinping is always there to exercise the iron hand. A few executions here and there, and that sort of thing. Then-
Performative.
Yeah,
It's performative. We know it's...
Sinasample lang.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sample
so
lang.
it goes back
yeah.
to, it gets back to the mean. So I think the point that we're trying to say here is that, corruption is bad. There's no discussion, there's no doubting that. But in terms of its impact on development, it would be relatively minor compared to
Bad
structural
economic
factors
policies. Yeah.
and policies.
Yeah.
And I think in the case of the Philippines in particular, and I think this goes into Leloy's book,
Yeah.
because of the colonial influence, the austerity, we had a weak state here. These, the elites, the social elites, became accustomed to basically using the state as a means of capital accumulation. And of course, that means that, you put it in more contemporary language, you use the state as a means of capital accumulation through massive control of, and which results in corruption. So I think that in other countries, and I would say most of our neighboring countries, we did have a state that had relative independence from civil society and could discipline
Oligarchs.
the oligarchy, including elite civil society, whether it's in Korea, etc. I mean, these were not societies where elite civil society called the shots on a weak state that they only viewed as a mechanism for capital accumulation. But they were very careful not to offend this state because they could get disciplined, by it. Like a classic example is, if you did not want to participate in export-oriented industrialization in Korea during Park Chung-hee's regime, he would send the tax people after you. And then that was his way of forcing...
Pressuring you, yeah.
O wala kang kuryente, actually.
Yeah, they would cut off electricity. So it was a fairly strong state, which we didn't have here because of colonial policies and then the use by the so I guess what I'm trying to say is that the coexistence of a predatory dynastic elite and a weak state have complemented one another.
May I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, in the sense that it was the dynastic elites from the beginning of our republic.
This is what I'm grappling with, Walden,
Yeah.
because you need a strong state to create developmentalism. And in the case of Korea, you had a dictator. And in the case of China, you have a dictator. Can you have it within a democracy? What's the solution here? How do we get to a developmental state while still maintaining our freedoms?
Yeah, can you have developmental state minus authoritarianism? Sweden, maybe? German? I mean, there are a couple of Scandinavian models. What comes to your mind?
My sense is that we can have, democracy and development takes place at the same time if we're not too purist about what we mean by democracy.
Okay. Medyo kinabahan. Okay, what do you mean? Walden,
No, but
that
what I
sounds like
mean-
Ronald Liama's way of explaining
No,
things.
no, but what
let's
I
not debate
mean-
about elections. Maybe it
Yeah.
happened, maybe it didn't happen.
Yeah. No, but what I mean is that you could have rules you know, that basically allow for the intervention of the state in a major way to deal with, you know, issues of, you know, corruption, of policy making towards development and that sort of thing. So basically, I don't really see a strong state as in contradiction to democracy. It's just that maybe what we have always when we think about democracy is the kind of
Oligarchic
liberally-
electoral
no,
competition.
the liberal democracy that we have in the
Yeah.
United States. You know, so once we begin to think that you have gradations of democracy, then you know we you know we're you know because this is the big problem. Whenever we think about democracy, our immediate thinking is liberal democracy a la United States. That's my sense. And maybe what we really need to be doing is how do we reform the state so that it becomes a stronger state, but at the same time does respect democratic freedoms. And the US or British example are not the only examples around.
Except, Lele, going back to you, I mean, before I go to the legal part, I mean, we have the American colonial legacy. We discussed that. Even yung corruption scandal natin ngayon, may kinalaman dun sa pork barrel system na inherit natin sa Americans. So the American footprint is all over this. This is not a Filipino thing. This is an imperial legacy. We did not shake off, right?
Yeah.
Can we a little bit engage that perspective? Kasi at the end of the day, we cannot deny yung corruption na nangyari sa atin sa Philippines. It's quite unique. I mean, we're not uniquely corrupt, but the types of corruption, we have this pork barrel, allocable, whatever you want to call it.
Richard,
this
if
is
I
a
can
very
interject to what Walden
Please,
is saying. In a constitutional democracy, actually, there are ways by which the state can intervene in a democratic, in a constitutional way, like industries can be nationalized. Industries can be privatized, can be nationalized, property can be taken over by the state. And these means by which the state can control the industrial policy is not necessarily inconsistent with a constitutional democracy.
Kahit yung agrarian reform natin,
Exactly.
law natin, di ba? Even
Agrarian
as weak as
reform
it is now, meron pa ring ways yung gobyerno mag-sequester ng lupa.
Of course, our agrarian reform law is very much watered down. It's really not a genuine agrarian reform. But if we had a stronger, a more radical, a more progressive version of the agrarian reform law, the law could have been a means to actually change the system.
So I think that's where I slightly disagree with Walden. I think the problem of the definitional specificity is less with democracy than with the strong state. I think the misunderstanding of a strong state is authoritarian state. There's someone there who will throw you in jail, file tax evasion laws against you, either the soft version, Lee Kuan Yew, or the hard version, I don't know, Marcos, whatever. When actually a strong state, Denmark is a strong state, Sweden is a strong state, right? It's not authoritarian. Strong means it's autonomous. It's not influenced by oligarchies and lobbies. It's capable. It can enforce. So this is a very Samuel Huntington political science definition of a strong state. I think our problem in the Philippines is that people do not understand what a truly strong state is. A strong state is a capable, autonomous state that can provide basic needs of the people and can actually clip the wings of whether external or internal disruptors.
And still remain democratic.
And still remain accountable to people in accordance to Constitution. So constitutional democracy. So
I think
that was where I medyo umakyat ang kilay ko. We can talk about kilay a bit more later on when we talk about the Ombudsman case. But you see where my thing is, I
you
think...
put it much better than I was doing.
I think it's maybe the Konya, but...
It
was good quality, but you know...
Pero yung tanong,
you see where I'm coming from.
Yung tanong ko kay
Thanks,
Star
by the way,
kay
thanks, Attorney
Walden,
Star. That was a great intervention.
What country can we
think
about in that sense? Because obviously, like, if we had the Park Chung-hee, I think we would end up kind of organizing against him too, even if he did provide some of the goods, right? And if we had...
But Koreans did that. They kicked him out
if we had the
eventually.
Xi Jinping, we would have organized, at least us, among friends, diba? So what models can we take inspiration from na walang ganon, walang Park Chung-hee, walang Lee Kuan Yew?
Chile, Latin America, minus Pinochet, I don't know, the Allende version of Chile. I mean, are there like Latin American, Asian, post-colonial cases? I mean, Turkey at some point was kind of a hybrid democratic system, which fastly industrialized. It only went really crazy in the past few years. But for a long time, Turkey's best years in terms of industrialization, economic growth, were when actually AKP was a very democratic system, when there were no coup d'etats, right? So I don't think you can find a perfect case of an Asian post-colonial state that, you know, like purely democratic. And so that's where I kind of agree with you, Walden. But I think there's enough lesson you can pick from here and there whereby you have enough of democratic accountability and enough of developmentalism to go together and mix it up, right?
Yeah, and I think if we broaden the range
Right.
of examples, you know, certainly the Scandinavian countries
Right,
did not
100%.
come out of scratch. I mean, they were
Social struggles.
Social struggles basically created the welfare
Labor
state.
unions, yeah.
And, you know, and so you know, if we look at the examples to include, you know, Nordic
100 years
examples,
ago, yeah,
100
exactly.
years
Yeah,
ago,
yeah, yeah.
then
Even social democratic Germany at one point,
Yes.
before Schroeder, of course.
Yeah.
yes, no, definitely.
When they were at our level of development, yeah.
So yes, I mean, I think you put it very well that it's not so much the democratic aspect, because you do have democracies, you know, do have possibilities for, you know, intervening, you know, through their, you know, with their constitutions, no? But more, what do we see as a strong state?
Yeah.
You know, and you can have, I believe, a strong democratic state, and
Strong democratic state.
so,
Yep.
well, just from our region, they were able to do this in Korea, post 1987. They were able to do this in Japan, post 1945.
Taiwan,
Yes.
Taiwan post
And
1998.
Japan, despite the hegemony of an LDP,
You're right, Japan is a very good example.
actually a liberal democracy
Yeah.
in the most conventional sense.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
And
Japan,
but-
yeah, absolutely.
but-
Taiwan,
sure.
Japan, Korea, they're all actually they're even more sophisticated in their growth if you look at Taiwan and South Korea in their post-authoritarian phase.
Yeah.
So if you look at Taiwan's type of economic growth from 1988 onwards,
ganun ba?
it's actually even higher quality. So you can
okay.
even make an argument that maybe a democratic way would have been even better for them from the beginning had they got the formula right, something like that. I mean, again, what I'm saying is that we can clearly see, yes, authoritarianism went with developmentalism, but the democracy went even better with developmentalism since 1980s, 90s in
Yeah.
Korea and Taiwan, I would say. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So we don't need to even go to Scandinavian countries for
But
that matter.
with a more interventionist state, there's also that greater possibility of corruption, because if the state is more interventionist, there's much exercise of discretion, like what industry will be given subsidy, what entity will be given preference, what, you know, those are
the
openings
Raj state.
for
Totoo yan,
corruption.
totoo yan.
So, hence, I think the question of whether we should curb the corruption first before we
we increase
engage
the bureaucracy.
exactly, or I personally believe it should be done simultaneously.
Yes.
But if we don't curb corruption at all and just focus on these interventions, giving the government basically freedom, absolute freedom to choose which entities to favor, which industries to subsidize. That can
My
be enough.
perfect counterexample to that would be France. So if you look at France, it's a very strong state and very low tolerance of corruption. I mean, very high level people from Fillon to Sarkozy to Le Pen, all of them could face political ban
Yeah.
for a long time.
Yeah.
At the same time, they're a very strong state. And for me, the secret sauce is civil service. Like France has this massive machinery of écoles, this elite schools creating really world-class civil servants who are trained in economics, trained in philosophy and law. They're like PPE on steroids, basically, of what you have in Oxford.
Actually, that's one of the best
That's what we don't have, civil service
ways
culture.
to address corruption. Have a very competent, well-paid, and
Singapore.
Can I
not a
start?
good-
Kasi
Yeah.
parang my feeling is, part of it is also because a lot of the administrators are lawyers, and then there's a kind of pañero culture. You rub my back, I rub your back, and then there's a kind of omerta among lawyers.
Sorority, fraternities together. Yeah.
And lawyers tend to think that they're very adept at bending the law a bit. They know how to exploit loopholes.
Right.
Um,
Then
yeah.
get things done, which
Then
is what
getting things
economists are
done,
trained,
exactly.
engineers are trained. So yun nga eh, like we have many lawyers, but we don't have civil service.
So what's
culture.
kind of like public service training for lawyers? Like when you went through law school and when you see your like peers, like how do they conceive of public service? I'm just like really interested in the lawyerly mentality.
Or at least UP law.
O UP law, ganyan.
Well, I'm lucky that in UP Law is more or less progressive. A lot of our professors are progressive. You know, we study legal philosophy. We have very progressive, you know, subjects. We have feminism,
rights,
labor
yeah.
rights, etc., etc. So maybe in UP, more or less, yes, we were indoctrinated in a certain sense, but I'm not too sure of other schools. But still, UP produces the most corrupt lawyers, despite that.
Like Harry.
I was
ex-human
preventing
rights
myself
lawyers.
from mentioning specific names.
See, I told you, Walden will be a Ronald
Yun
Llamas
na
this
nga eh.
episode.
Ito na yung anghang
This one, I have no problem. Let's talk
Blurting
about
out
Harry.
names.
Everyone's talking about... No, Walden, isn't Harry Roque a sociological phenomenon?
Or anomaly.
No. If I were Proust, if I were a novelist, and I wanted a kind of an archetypical character to say something is wrong with the aspirational middle class professional Filipino, right? Itong
Si Harry yun.
Harry Roque for me would be that character, right? If I were Zola writing like the whole life of a person, if I use Harry, I could use him as an example of where we. Like, kaya nga, di ba, ang pag-asa kasi natin yung professional middle class.
Are you pitching this
petit
to
bourgeois.
pitching this to novelists na kung may novelista dyan na magaling sumurat ng nobela based on Harry
I
Roque?
won't do it myself. So, do you get it? You get what I'm saying, Walden?
Yeah.
He is a sociological phenomenon. Kasi ang dami kong kilala na variation on the theme of Harry. Not as ambitious, not as sablay, hari ng sablay. Pero may pagka-Harry rin eh. Yung magaling sa human rights, magaling sa... Pero alam mo, trapong-trapo tong tao na to. When Duterte was there, they were not saying anything. If anything, they would... Ang dami kong kilalang ganun. And unlike you, I'm not gonna name them, Walden. But speaking of Harry Roque, what do you think as a sociologist? Is he an archetypical, wrong kind of aspirational petit bourgeoisie Filipino? Like, what is he?
Well, one can be very disappointed because, you know, I mean, he started as a human rights lawyer. He made his name, and he was instrumental in the Pemberton case.
Yes.
Jennifer Laude.
Jennifer.
He was the lead lawyer, you know,
Against
of the family.
Yeah.
That's when I got to work with him
Right.
in Attorney Virgie Suarez on Jennifer and Pemberton. So, as you said, what is the black box that's going to be opened up by a novelist? That's the problem of the novelist, not mine.
But you are like a film critic nowadays. I'm reading your... Either binabanatan mo ang mga kaibigan natin or binabanatan mo yung mga... I mean, in a critic way, in a social critic way.
Right.
You're like
but it's I mean, he would be sort of the archetypal
right? Yeah,
kind
exactly.
of person that falls astray because of the pressure and the attraction of interests,
And other attractions.
Ay
We're
nako,
rather
sabi ko
not-
na nga ba pupunta ka dun eh.
No, I mean, Vienna is a beautiful place, isn't
Sige
it?
na,
It's
sinabi mo,
before
sabi mo.
summer.
I saw that coming.
He's worried to get cancelled. Baka
Ikaw yung makakancel.
toxic
Sabi ko, I saw it
masculinity.
coming.
That's why I brought our lawyer here. She will protect us.
But I was also
Kami nila, Walden, nagkakalat na.
But I was also thinking, coming back to our
Disowners
neighbors.
after this. Yeah.
Kasi, okay, we can look at the case of how a strong state
Yes.
was built in France and the Nordic countries
Yeah.
from scratch but which also included social struggles.
A lot, yeah, like
Because
hard
without the
social-
social struggles, I don't think we can explain the creation of a strong welfare state. But what I wanted to say was, if you look at China, which is, okay,
Yeah.
Filipinos who go to China these days, and I've just talked to some, they come up with the Lincoln Stephens line, I have been
It's in
to
the future,
and it works.
It works, yeah.
And, so you go there and then
Shanghai, yeah.
Shanghai, Beijing, and it's
Chongqing,
ultra modern.
Chongqing, yeah.
Okay, they have 26,000 kilometers of rail.
High-speed railway. Yeah.
And in the United States, you just have the Boston, Washington, high speed.
Ano nangyari sa LA?
Tell me about it. I'm a Californian. We've been promised high-speed rail
20
between LA and San
years.
Francisco for decades.
Yeah, well,
Never happened.
But the point I was getting into was that how do you get an authoritarian society to bring down poverty levels to almost nothing, according to the World Bank? Now, if people from the Philippines, were choice, would you like to have a society that would bring down poverty levels to 2% or even less? I think they would probably say, yes, of course, that's
Yes.
what we need at this point
Unfortunately,
in time.
yes.
Which is where the Dutertismo comes from, right? You
Right.
need an authoritarian man to
But
fix the
if
system.
you look at
yeah.
China, which I think we need to be analytical here,
Yeah.
is you do have the central bureaucracy,
Yeah.
but then you also have the party machinery
Yeah. Parallel.
that's parallel there.
Yeah.
And then to top it all, you have within the party a machinery that looks at corruption,
Yeah.
aside from those that are developmental. And it's true that representative democracy has not been one of their priorities at this point in time. But if what you have is a leadership that said the priority is to develop.
And socioeconomic rights.
Yeah.
Socioeconomic equality. Yeah.
Socioeconomic rights, and that there will be corruption along the way, but we need to check it.
But, so are you saying, Walden, that in China there's an effective system of checks and balance?
Well, I think
Still.
so. Yes.
Uh-huh.
I would. It's not.
Including the oligarchs, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the Tencent guys, the Jack Ma,
Sure.
they all got the clip by the state once they tried to
Once
go
they-
Elon Musk. Yeah.
Once you go up
Yeah.
that
You
way,
get clipped, yeah.
you get creamed.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm just saying we don't need to adopt that kind of system. But for China, it seems to work, no? And so if you talk to somebody from China these days
Yeah.
and say, would they want to have a representative democracy, American style? I wonder if you'll even get 1% of the Chinese
Right.
who would say, yes, that's what we want. So basically, I think all I'm just saying is that let's have a certain level of analytical,
Nuance.
acuity, nuances, pragmatism, to realize that the formula may be different for different countries.
And a kind of Catholicity about where we take inspiration from.
Yeah.
We take some from this place, we take some from the other place. It's not going to be one model that
Yes.
we're going to take and we're going to implement
Melange.
here. and
Melange.
there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You are a defender of liberalism. Aren't you outraged by the quasi-communist Bolshevik? No,
Well,
I'm just kidding.
no.
I was getting worried, Walden. Just
Actually-
because I just talked to the Chinese ambassador doesn't mean...
I always tack to the left, tack to the right, depending
'Cause you're
on what
liberal.
I'm.
You're a true liberal.
I'm perennially confused.
Yeah.
I'm perennially confused, and I think that's one of the marks of a liberal.
Yeah.
But but
At the
even
high
the-
level, at the high level.
even me at my most kind of center left liberal, I never advocated for a kind of free market liberalism.
Yeah.
I was always a
Yes,
social
of course,
democrat, and I
yes.
always believed that the reason why you have Scandinavia is because you had a working class that organized and created that system. And I'm really, really nostalgic for Scandinavia kasi nakakamiss nga because the kind of
100%.
developmentalism we've seen right now is top-down developmentalism.
Yeah.
But if you look at the height of the Second International, this was socialism at its best. This was socialism holding the state accountable people and forcing it to transform. I think pwede pa rin
And
yun
building the Volvos and BMWs and all of
I
this
think
stuff.
pwede.
Yeah.
And then asking them to
Yeah.
make sure that if you gave us jobs, that these would be unionized jobs and that these
Yeah.
would be jobs we could keep until we're retired and we have good pensions afterwards. I think that model should not necessarily be thrown out the window.
The
That just
social
because it happened
partnership, social
100 years
democracy
ago.
one, yeah.
My sense is the social democratic model is the one that fits us and our traditions and our history.
Because we don't do extremes. And-
I mean, let's face it,
Yeah.
we do have this heritage, legacy of liberalism,
Yeah.
the impact of the West, etc., etc. I mean, my sense is it's not going to be the Chinese model that's there, etc., etc. But I do think that,
Yeah.
as Leloy said, let's be Catholic.
But
in
Walden,
terms of
yung
our-
mga partners natin in terms of social democracy, like the Germans, a lot of the Swedish, a lot of them have betrayed the cause of the original Second International as well. So how do we take inspiration from them when a lot of them are very wishy-washy about their own great traditions?
Well, it's
Like the SPD is your great example of this
Yeah.
kind of betrayal, right, in Germany?
Yeah, right. But then you also have new parties like Die Linke in Germany. You have Mélenchon in
Greens,
France.
or Greens and
So
all
there
that.
is reform within the social democratic tradition itself. That's
What about
that's
democratic
correct.
socialism? Mamdani, Bernie Sanders, your friend. I mean,
Yeah.
what about that tradition? Is that something we can build on?
But yes, certainly, it's something that we see eye to eye with that tradition because we're part of that, And but I would say, really that that the the possibilities for us cannot just remain at the level of changing laws.
Yeah.
It can't be just as you said, rely on reforming the bureaucracy. I think there's just that hard work that you have to have. I don't want
Social struggle.
social struggle, revolutionary transformation, because without that, as a pillar,
Yeah.
the anti-dynasty law will just remain a law, okay? And how do I think part of the problem is how do we? And now this is a very sensitive topic. Is
Sure,
that
sure.
How do progressives again connect with people's needs
Oh, yes.
and interests?
Yeah.
Tawagin
And,
ko na si Ronald.
But-
Ronald, are you
but-
watching us live?
But they're not, right? So my question for
Yeah.
everyone is, bakit na-addict yung, maybe they're not progressive, but the so-called liberal opposition, why are they so addicted to anti-corruption discourse? Why is it a kind of default? Like, every time there's a corruption scandal, they latch onto it and that becomes sort of the main rhetoric. And, they get energized for a couple of months and then it dissipates.
I mean, let's ask Star. I mean,
Yeah,
Star,
Star
what
is
is your
the one who can
understanding?
answer that.
Because ako, to be honest, because ako for me, this is really bad corruption. Like, talagang binaboy nila yung public infrastructure na people are dying because of these flood control projects not going wrong. I mean, the Discaya types are getting filthy rich and all of that. I mean, so for me, I think there's really some hyper level of corruption that happened in the past decade. And that's where I use the term hyper impunity. The past decade is a decade where tens of thousands of people got killed, massacred, and tens of thousands of projects went ghost. So you ghosted people and you ghosted infrastructure, like double killing, double massacre, basically. I think we should not deny that. Like, despite all of our discussion about corruption and development and all, something really fundamentally went wrong. And I think this is down your alley because you're a lawyer after all. Something went wrong with our constitutional democracy's ability to ensure basic systemic accountability.
Exactly. Well, first to Leloy's question, I think because, I don't know, some may disagree, corruption is actually a gut issue because when people see widespread corruption, they feel that that's money being taken from us. Money that we could have spent for our meal today, money we could have spent for healthcare, and yung mga PI na mga
Yeah.
opisyal na yan, ginagamit lang nila pambili ng Chanel.
Yeah.
So, for them, it's very emotional. So, it's easy to tap into that anger kasi dapat amin yan eh. Binabayaran namin yan. Taxes namin yan. Pagkatapos kami dito, nagpapakahirap, nag-overtime.
Is it a middle class thing or a
toiling.
massa thing?
I think it's massa and middle class. We middle class pay 30% taxes.
A lot of taxes, yeah.
Diba? It's painful. Whenever you see your payslip and it's 30% and you see this Nepo kids like enjoying a private jet.
That's your 30%.
That's my 30%. That's my money. So, especially for the masa, pag nadidinig ko yung mga masa ngayon, you know, I come from a poor neighborhood when I was a kid. And that's what you would hear from them. Pera natin dapat yan, ninanakawan na tayo. So, para sa kanila, gut issue yung corruption, madaling magalit. Pero things like industrial policy, things like economic policy, things like societal reform,
So
medyo
abstract.
abstract kasi sa kanila eh. So, hindi masyadong madaling ma-appreciate. It doesn't mean that these other things are not as important. Kaya lang, mas madaling ibenta sa mga masa na kaya tayo mahirap, kaya tayo hindi umuunlad. Kasi ang daming mga magdanakaw dito.
But that's I think that's the internal logic of that
Right,
narrative.
right.
The counter argument would be quite simple on two levels. Like, first of all, I mean, if you can connect those economic policy, industrial policy to affordability, jobs, employment, inflation issues, then suddenly they make sense. O ang ibig sabihin ng industrial policies, magkakaroon tayo ng pabrika at magkaroon kayo ng trabaho at see, when you translate that, suddenly it's concrete. Which is, I think, it's the failure, or rather, we are unable to do that because everything is all about these Nepo kids and corruption. We cannot come in. But that's, I think, the real debate and discussion. And we saw it with Mamdanis and Social Democrats and Socialists. They're doing very successfully with that, even the Dutertes. The second one would be, right, I mean, the surveys don't support that. The surveys are very clear. The top 3 issues for our people are not corruption. It's still employment, inflation, affordability issue.
I wonder how recent that survey is because with the flood control thing, when it exploded, I think that's what everybody's
It is
angry
important,
about.
but not urgent, right? And then the other argument would be, and this is where things get a bit tricky, is at the same time, people get angry, I agree. They get angry with corruption and say it goes away. But when the same mayor that they know is corrupt pays for their wedding, pays for their funeral, pays for their ganon, you hear the same people making pero mabait naman si mayor eh. Do you get what I'm saying?
right.
Then suddenly it gets complicated. That's what I noticed.
Interesting.
And that's where it doesn't apply to the middle class because the middle class is not going to ask the mayor to bail them out for a wedding or
Right,
anything.
right.
So I feel that sense of pain of taking away is more irreversible with the middle class, unlike the poor na walang cushion na ganon. Like, alam namin crook tong mga kurakot na to eh. Pero dahil tinulungan nila ako, nagkasakit yung anak ko, dinala ko sa ospital, biglang lumambot sa... Kasi you talk to these people, alam mo naman kurakot. Kaso, boss, si mayor kasi tinulungan kami, may utang na loob na kami. Or look at just the malasakit, populism of Bongo, right? I'm sure everyone is smart enough to know this is not his money. This is taxpayers' money and he's just personalizing But nevertheless, andun pa rin yung normative, you know, utang na loob. Do you get what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. To the middle class, mas irreversibly emotional, visceral, and angering. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
That's how I make sense
yeah.
of the surveys. Eh.
So,
Pero yung, go ahead.
I have a theory, one theory why the yellow opposition is so addicted to anti-corruption. It's because the neoliberal economists are largely with them, or many of the neoliberal economists are part of that group. And so you can blame yourself, right? So what do? You externalize it, you say it's corruption. So I think there's actually the symbiosis, I said, sabi ko dun sa episode, and this is largely taking inspiration from Walden, but I think there's a symbiosis between the mainstream economists and the mainstream political scientists. The mainstream political scientist says the major problem of our society is dynasty, oligarchy, corruption. The mainstream economist does not want to look into their policies, thinks that their policies are perfect, and then they look at society. If my policies are perfect, my neoliberal policies are perfect, why is the country still poor? It can't be me. So I look to the political scientists and agree with the political scientists. That's why if you listen to a lot of like
symbiosis.
neoliberal economists, they talk like political scientists. They don't actually want to talk about the economic policies because in their mind, the economic orthodoxy is settled. Di mo na pinag-uusapan yun eh.
And the political scientists are also not getting to economic policies because they have this, oh, this is your turf, this is my turf.
Yeah.
There's also that kind of, I've heard so many political scientists in this country saying, oh, I don't do economics. I was like, weren't we forced to take at least 15 units of economics, right? During our undergraduate at the very least. I find that weird because you don't see that in any other serious country, to be
Hindi
honest.
pwede yun. As somebody who still takes inspiration from kind of Marxian analysis, there is no political analysis without economic
Yeah, I mean, that's why you have
analysis, right?
London School of Economics and Political Science. I mean, that's why we call it political
Is
economy.
it mutually exclusive, though? Do we have to really disagree and determine which one's more important, whether it's industrial policy or corruption? Why can't we consider both?
It's the crowding out effect na I was mentioning eh. Like there's no more room for any other discussion. In fact, Lelo is saying there's almost like a conspiracy of silence whereby, no, wag na natin pag-usapan yung mga...
We push both.
Hindi, yun nga eh. But we're trying. That's what that's status quo. But I'm yet to see it's working.
okay. Sige, ako magpapangalan ako. Kasi
In theory, I'm okay with that. But
Kasi ako magpapangalan
Ayan
ako
na,
kasi
ayan
si
na.
Walden nagpangalan, so mauna na ako.
Nakadalawa ka na.
Ron Mendoza of the Atty School of Government, great guy, friend of mine. But in a volume about the legacies of the Marcos regime, he said that what we should learn from the rent-seeking and cronyism of the Marcos regime is that the state should not intervene but should simply be a fair market regulator.
basically, night watchman, blah, 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 free market.
So
blah,
clearly,
blah, blah.
this is where anti-corruption discourse feeds into neoliberalism because everything is corrupt, the state should just be a fair market regulator, should not intervene.
Walang pag... In fact, with Lila, with Sean, we had this discussion na parang, why is everyone blaming government as if the private sector is so perfect? I think, again, Marco Garrido had this perfect work about, you know, people go to these BGC areas and malls and look at that as a little Singapore, not realizing, but this is private. If they don't want you in, they'll kick you out. If the guards hindi ka type, they'll kick you out. Public sector is different. It's supposed to be inclusive, democratic, accountable. It doesn't operate by the logic of profit, right? The state belongs to us. BGC belongs to, I don't know, Ayala, whatever. It's different. So we have this idea that the state is yung pabigat and then umaasa tayo sa private sector. But look at the toll fees in these countries. It's incredible. I mean, I'm heading home Baguio soon. I have to pay $20, $30 just to go through toll fees. That's insane. Just going through Skyways here in Manila is $10. It's insane. That's higher than your minimum wage, daily minimum wage. And yet, for some reason, parang ang taas ng expectation, bahala na lang private sector, bahala ng private sector. So, I think this is where Stevie was right. If your problem is the state, why not fix it? Why are you throwing out the baby with the bathwater? That's what I love when
These guys are defeatists, essentially.
Exactly. And this is coming from a banker.
These guys are
This is coming from a banker who dealt with 10 different emerging markets and realized...
These guys don't believe in the Filipino people, in other words. Because if you say you give up on the state, you've given up on the Filipino people.
Because those politicians are from us. They're from us.
I think, you know, neo-mercantilism, at least in the original sense of List, said that we should harness the power of the people in order to better society. And I think this is such a potent metaphor for us. Sa akin, ito yung metaphor of Bernardo Carpio eh.
Right.
Yung Katagalugan, meron siyang untapped power. Kaso kinadena natin, kinadena ng imahinasyon natin, kinadena ng mga Kastila, kinadena ng mga Amerikano, but it's there.
Shackled,
I mean, those people who are neoliberals, they actually don't believe in the power of the sleeping Bernardo Carpio to rehabilitate this country. And we do. I think all of us do.
Mythos ka na ng logos. Now, yes, Walden.
I think in line with what Lelo is saying, and also what Star said, hindi lang galit sa corruption, kundi pag sa solusyon, meron na silang solusyon. And I'm talking about
The liberals.
the 35%, which is stronger than the liberals. By the way.
You mean the Dutertismo? Yeah, exactly.
Who are basically saying that,
May solusyon
okay,
kami. Yep.
see, there's corruption here and there. Pero ito yung solusyon.
Yeah.
Patayin lahat yan.
Yan. No, well, yung malakas na leadership.
Yeah.
Kayang-kaya ni Sarah yan.
Yeah.
Mga ganon.
Hindi Sarah, si Omar. Kilala mo si Omar?
Yeah. And
Marami. You don't know.
Anak ni
Parang
Polong.
tong Kim Dynasty, di ba?
okay.
Meron digong. Meron polong. And then there's Omar Duterte. Like, it gets more interesting.
Mayor Omar.
Mayo.
Hindi siya mayor.
Ay, congressman.
Vice mayor.
Yeah.
Ay, congressman.
Vice
Oo
mayor,
nga, congressman pala, sorry.
congressman.
Vice mayor yung kapatid
but
niya,
in
Rodrigo.
any case-
Sorry.
But in any case, the
Kasi baka wala na
corruption,
si
the
Sarah,
feelings
biglang
against
Omar.
corruption
Yeah.
get harnessed in a populist way
Right.
by those who basically say, that what you really need is strong leadership, which may be corrupt, that sort of thing, but they'll change things.
Yeah.
And I
Political
think-
will. All we need
And
is
I
political
think
will.
That has been the source of the appeal of the Dutertes. And
Yeah.
compare that to the strength of the Pinklawans, mahina yung Pinklawan appeal.
11%?
Kasi
11%? Parang ganun?
Yeah. Because
15, 15.
aside from the appeal of the strong leader, they also have the narrative of the massa. Yung discourse, kaya nila.
Yeah. To
Habang
speak
yung
like
discourse
them.
ng anti-corruption is largely middle class na hindi talaga nakaka-connect. So merong discourse narrative issue rin yan. Kasi tingnan mo si Digong, no?
Di ko.
When he was president, he used to go into these digressions. Yung 1/4 of his speech was the prepared speech. Pero yung digression was the key. No?
Which is
And-
what's relatable. Because
What's
normal people digress. Yeah.
So basically, there was, let's face it, they had the ability to connect in the same way that elite politicians have not been able to do. And of course, Bongbong Marcos cannot communicate at all. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's not only the anger against corruption, there's also the way that it's harnessed by certain groups within the elite. And then there's the discourse and narrative that connects with people, which, the middle class anti-corruption discourse cannot do.
Or even alienates, right? Yung parang padisente, sanctimonious.
Pearl-clutching.
There's almost a bobotante attack version to it. Like,
Yeah.
alam mo kung hindi lang nagpabenta ng boto, tumato, di sana walang... Kasi, we know what's the cycle, right?
Yeah.
Vote buying, ROI, flood control, perahan mo yan, the next election. So, you get saying, like, it goes into... But, having said that, I mean, nevertheless, the Attorney Star, we have this massive corruption on our hands. Something could be done after all, hindi na figure in yung ombudsman, di ba? Can we talk about what are the expectations around the upcoming list? And realistically, I talk to different people, I get different. I mean, some legal luminaries like Justice Carpy would say, realistically looking at 5 to 6 months, na baka premature talaga yung promise na before the end of the year, which is almost done, magkakaroon na, parang it was too... Can you explain us yung parang yung kailangan na may threshold, may certainty of conviction,
Right.
like can you explain, like realistically, how many months are we looking at bago yung ombudsman can come up with a robust case that can stand the test of court
Okay.
scrutiny?
Well, I've been in litigation for
You were a prosecutor, yeah.
decades. So, in an ordinary criminal case, for instance, this is an ordinary
Right.
criminal case, not even a high-profile case. It takes about 6 months to even a year to do preliminary investigation. This is a preliminary investigation conducted by the prosecutor. Like in your case, Kawa, it took months, right? Before the preliminary. Sorry, I had to
Ouch.
mention. So
You can
it
drink.
takes months for an ordinary prosecutor to determine probable cause.
Yun, yeah.
For high-profile cases and more complex cases, you would think it takes longer. unless, of course,
You put more
the case is
resources and more- yeah,
prioritized, you
exactly.
put more prosecutors in the panel, you put more assisting prosecutors to do the research. So if it's prioritized, yes, it can be done within a period of a few months. The thing is, the Department of Justice increased the threshold
Yun.
from mere probable cause to now reasonable certainty of conviction.
So yung quantum went up.
The quantum went up because the rationale was, in the past, a lot of nuisance cases gets filed.
Right. Now we're
And
weaponized.
because the threshold was only probable cause, it was so easy to establish probable cause, and therefore a lot of harassment suits get filed in court. So now the DOJ looks for reasonable certainty of conviction, which is quite a high bar. So basically, the prosecutor, when examining the evidence before it, will need to see already that, this is more or less going to secure a conviction when it gets to court. So it's not a conviction, but reasonable certainty of
So bakit
conviction.
ang lakas ang mangako? Like, something will happen before
Yeah.
Christmas, ganyan. Parang they got us all
This guy
excited.
got
Oh.
into jail. I mean,
Maybe he gave his team a deadline. I mean, if you have a big team and this
Yeah.
has been certified as top priority by the president, for instance, and something can indeed come out at the end of the year or before at the start of the year. But you don't want to do it haphazardly. That's the point, because my observation is a lot of these public officials, even high-profile public officials like Mayor Binay, like Herbert Bautista, like Bong Revilla, they get charged. They get charged.
and then it doesn't stick.
And then what happens?
Yeah.
Down the year, down the road, after 2 or 3 years, they quietly get acquitted. So
But is it
nobody
because
gets
of
punished.
But is it because of the weakness of the case or Sandigan Bayan? Because no one talks about Sandigan Bayan. Like the past year was a winning streak for all our friends. Napoles, Bina, Enrile. Well, Enrile has passed on. Even the cronies of Marcos, a lot of their cases, they're all winning acquittal, right and left.
Exactly. And then the
What's
thing
going
is,
on?
it appears that the public will be satisfied as long as there's an indictment. But
And then the
if
rest-
news of the acquittal comes out, nobody
Paid attention.
pays attention. So, there are several factors. Maybe the evidence presentation wasn't handled competently by the Office of the Ombudsman or Office of the Tanod Bayan. Of course, there are people saying that maybe the composition of the current Sandigan Bayan also may have something to do with it.
I mean-
The thing is, the Sandigan Bayan only handles cases against public officials. And so you can imagine the level of temptation that can,
So
give
not only
rise to.
technocrats, people in the judiciary, justice system also. That's also.
I'm not saying that applies to everybody.
I'm not saying that too,
or
'cause I
there's
have a
proof
contempt
that
case at
there's
the Supreme
there's
Court.
that, but it's quite disheartening that you file cases against this big fish, a so-called big fish, officials, but eventually the cases get dismissed, and so nothing happens, and people just shrug it off. Well, ma-acquit din naman yan after a while. Kanwari, may ingay lang ngayon kasi may public clamor.
Yeah.
But eventually,
So
sayang,
I want to shout out
because
this
the
new
Ombudsman
series
is
of pieces.
very, very, very powerful office. The Ombudsman is a very powerful
Right.
office.
If used properly.
If used properly, the Ombudsman can entertain anonymous complaints. That's how powerful it
Unlock
is.
money laundering.
The anti-money laundering law, independently of the Ombudsman, independently of the prosecutors, regardless of whether there are cases filed, can already apply for a freeze order. I've been saying this since months
Forever.
back.
I
Why
know,
is
I know.
nobody applying for a freeze order on the assets of all those mentioned?
So wala na yung assets na yun ngayon. Tinakbo na yun.
But there will be traces, right? I mean, the argument now is there will be traces na billions
There are
moved through.
ways. I mean, once you've withdrawn, kasi the covered entities are like what? Banks, insurance companies, financial institutions. I've heard politicians who keep their money in cash somewhere in
With
like 5
mistresses,
basements of
with mistresses.
in mistresses. So
Grabe.
how
You
can
suddenly
you,
become influencer and like entrepreneurs. And,
how can you forfeit
yeah.
assets that you can no longer find? I mean, when did the AMLC apply for a freeze order from the Court of Appeals? Just recently? And this has been, the investigation has been going on for months.
So, ibig sabihin, imbestigahan na yung mga fashion brand ng anak ni
Yeah.
Lisandro.
You know that two senators that are mentioned oftentimes with respect to
J&J.
yeah,
J&J.
si Villanueva and si
Jingoy and Joel. J&J.
yeah, Joy and you know. Nadali na yan dun sa
Napoles.
Carpio Ombudsman time, no?
Conchita.
Carpio
Conchita,
na huli na yan.
Lalo si Joel,
Tapos,
inano nung susunod si Martires.
Yeah.
The figurine. Basically useless. Totally useless. Hindi ba pwede kasuhan yan? Kung suspiciously walang ginagawa yung ex-ombudsman, hindi ba sila pwede held accountable?
Public officials can be held accountable.
Exactly.
Yes.
If suspiciously
You know,
this guy
there's
was...
this beautiful provision in an anti-graft and corrupt practices law, Section 3E, which can basically cover any conceivable act of graft and corruption. It says that any public official who causes undue injury to any party, including the government, or grants unwarranted benefit to any party by bad faith, bias, gross negligence, is liable. Is criminally liable. So basically, that's a catch-all provision.
Magkaso na tayo mamaya.
So-
we should file cases too. Why are other we should file cases too, Walden. Why should they file against us? We file against them. Let's go to the last part.
Don't give him ideas, Richard.
Yeah,
Gagawin
like
niya.
Walden is getting excited.
Gagawin niya yan.
But let's go to the last part because I want to talk about the solutions part. I know it was a long day for all of us. Sorry for keeping everyone, but I'm glad we have a lawyer among us because you can see we're all quiet just listening. This is very important. Now let's go to the last part. Let's talk about solutions. Walden, it looks like your idea of solution is slightly different from some of us here. Your idea is that this problem is so deep, the core of the apple is so rotten. It looks like your idea of change is not just what ombudsman list would be or not putting a few politicians in jail. What should happen? Obviously, social struggle is part of this equation. What kind of social struggle do you have in mind? Short of getting us red tagged here or let's take this program in trouble.
well, it's December 30, Rizal Day today.
Yes, Rizal Day, of course, our hero. Yes,
And,
he had to bring in Rizal. Yeah.
No, but what I mean is seriously,
Yep.
I think that the counter position of Rizal to Bonifacio was to some extent artificial.
Yes,
Yeah,
it was.
talaga.
I mean,
There were one
I think
side,
they
yeah.
were really for revolutionary transformation.
Yes.
Thank you.
And they, yun nga, and that was
Diliman consensus.
na kanyan, diliman consensus
Yeah.
that basically I think that was that greatest generation
Absolutely.
saw that, no, and ang sense ko is if the underlying social structure is the problem, and we're talking about dynastic control propped up by control over land and property and its various permutations, how can we avoid the issue of dealing with that and transforming that social structure?
Right.
And to some extent, back in the 70s, 80s, the left presented a transformative program, and to some extent they were successful in mobilizing around it. And then owing to different things that are happened, they in many ways self-marginalized themselves. But I do not think that we can limit the proposals at the level of law only, like an anti-dynasty law, or to the level of government reform.
It's a budget process
Yeah.
and all, yeah.
I think those are important.
Those are important,
They're
of
very
course.
important,
100%.
but without the transformative struggle at the grassroots, it will be very difficult to have sustainable reforms. And that's why I agree with Leloy that the yellow-pink crowd has very limited
Myopic.
vision about what you really need. And that's one thing that I would say is, much as we know it's going to be very difficult, you do have to have a progressive movement that has roots again in the grassroots. Otherwise, things will be very, very fragile at the level of the superstructure.
You're the historian. You wrote the book on Rizal.
Yeah.
What would Rizal say on this situation right
Pwede
now?
bang kumambyo ng konti? Kasi
Yes,
Walden
sure.
already provided yung
Yeah.
grassroots perspective.
Yeah.
I want to talk about policy actually. And of course, it's not mutually exclusive. These
No,
are,
not at all.
yung iahain ko na policy dito, no, I'm actually talking to fellow progressives here. These are kind of policies that I think we should build grassroots support for.
Right.
Yung unang-una, I think, is reform the central bank. The grassroots does not think about this, but the greatest reforms in banking have come as a result of grassroots movements. Adam Tooze, in fact, said that the reason why we reformed banking in the United States was because there was an agrarian movement during the progressive era that criticized the gold standard. So they were economically literate enough to challenge monetary policy kahit magsasaka sila. And so I think there is a moment now in Philippine history where the left, kahit magsasaka ka, manggagawa ka, you should take it to the central bank and challenge their austere policies. And there's one austere policy of the central bank that we should challenge. It is this idea that the central bank has no developmental goals. Kasi most central banks in the world have two goals: price stability and development.
Yeah.
Our central bank is so austere, so conservative that it only has one goal:
right.
inflation reduction. And to put it in perspective, in the US, that is such a right-wing position that the only person advocating that is Mike Pence in the United States. And we've accepted that here. So I think we should organize around that so that we can get the central bank to commit to more developmental spending. That's one clear reform that I think we should mobilize for. Second one, increase the budget of the DTI. So Jesus Felipe came up with a position paper on corruption, and he said, ang daming ang nanakaw. But yung nanakaw is not even the equivalent of what the budget of is so far from what the ideal budget of the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry, should be relative to our GDP. And that's why we don't have industrial policy. So apparently, if you look at the website of the DTI, there is an industrial policy program of the DTI, except nobody implements it kasi walang budget yung DTI. So meron actually industrial policy, hindi lang ini-implement and there's no money for it. So second, increase the budget of the DTI so that it mirrors as a percentage of GDP the budgets of equivalent trade and industry ministries in other more progressive countries.
Or at least peers.
Yeah. Pangalawa, and this is not so much policy, but this is more kind of like perspective pagdating sa budgeting. Again, inspired from Jesus. We should make sure that when we budget, the question is not what we can afford based on a household model. In other words, ito yung utang natin, ito yung dapat budget natin. The first question that we should ask is not what we can afford based on bonds, based on domestic utang. The first question should be, what should the Filipino people need? What do the Filipino people need? So it's a need-based kind of budgeting as opposed to a deficit kind of budgeting. And when you start budgeting that way, you start thinking about healthcare, you start thinking about services, you start thinking about education.
Macro, not household
you start
economics.
Thinking, and that's ultimately, I think, how you address even the issue of inflation, because the issue of inflation that poor people care about is not the price of assets, right? Bonds, whatever. The issue of inflation that they care about is food security, food inflation. And so if you have industrial policy, yes, maybe you can inflate the core inflation, baka tumaas yun, pero yung fundamental price that people care about, food, bababa yung presyo.
Or real wages will increase.
Or real
or
wages
you increase their wages.
Real
so it
wages will
compensates for
increase,
any
yeah. And
inflation.
this is where, of course, we get back to yung issue of food security, which Walden also wrote about dun sa Food Wars book. So I think we're going back to a lot of, that's why I was asking Walden about the 1990s. We're going back, I think, to a lot of the fundamental debates we had in the 1990s when we first started to challenge the neoliberal consensus.
So kung meron tayong freedom from debt coalition, which is a form of questioning some technical kind of paradigm, right? We have to have a version of that on monetary policy, fiscal policy, and industrial policy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So basically, mga adhikain na hindi natatakot sa technical language.
Yeah.
Economics has to be demystified.
Yeah.
And really, Walden, the reason why we did this episode
The
is
mass movement, the social movement should not be afraid of
Intimidated.
economics to the point na willing ka makipagbanatan sa Central Bank of the Philippines kahit magsasaka ka or manggagawa
because
ka.
at the end of the day, it's ideological,
Yeah,
as
yeah.
Walden, you said,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I think that when it came to battling the IMF and the World Bank, people developed that literacy then.
Yes.
Right.
And the WTO, it was a highly technical debate.
Correct.
But the mass movement did take it
So
on.
Seattle and all, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean not just the mass movement, but the arguments about why free markets were bad for developing countries.
Which MAGA is doing now.
Right.
Which MAGA
And
is
we
doing
won.
now,
I mean,
effectively. yeah.
basically, if we see ourselves as part of this global movement,
Yeah.
we won against the ideology of neoliberalism. But of course, there were certain things that were not taken up, like what Bello was saying, that a central culprit in this whole problem of lack of development is the central bank.
Yep.
And I think this is why his work is extremely important. Hey, there are hidden culprits that are that have also been key, and it's not just the usual suspects, but you have this central bank that has this aura of mystery, and so yeah, I mean monetary policies and to that we do need.
Yeah.
People who will take that on.
I mean, I
And
don't
not just
understand the
professional
mystification.
economists.
Sorry, I don't understand the mystification. The central bank, a certain former tourism secretary with zero knowledge on economics ended up there in the central bank in a very high level,
okay.
thanks to, I don't know, you explained to me, right? So like, it's not like our central bank is filled necessarily with like the best Oxbridge and Ivy League graduates, no offense, right? But now I dropped the bomb,
Yeah,
right?
ikaw na.
Attorney Star, before I put myself in more trouble, because who knows, maybe one day I want to work there also. Like, what do you think should, from a legal perspective, what do you think are the important things moving forward?
Right.
Granted, yung mga sinasabi nila, Walden and
I know,
Lele.
because I came from the field of law, of course. My primary advocacy is judicial reform.
Right.
The judiciary is a very important component in the checks and balance system for government or for
Right.
constitution. So if you have a rotten judiciary, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to curb corruption. Because how can you hold public officials accountable if you have a rotten judiciary, and that includes the prosecution service that keep on acquitting all these corrupt individuals. So I still believe that if people are more or less certain about the consequences of their actions, that this can lead to imprisonment, this can lead to maybe even life sentence if it's plunder, then I believe that there will be less people who will be minded to do corruption. The problem is the judiciary has the lowest budget of all the three branches of
Right.
government. The screening that they do for prosecutors and for the members of the judiciary are not that robust.
That's why I mentioned the
it's
civil servants thing. You need
Exactly.
strong people
For
to
the
work
Supreme
with
Court,
them.
you have the Judicial and Bar Council, which are composed of politicians, mostly politicians, who do not have the credibility necessary to screen the best people for the judiciary. For instance, I know of a lot of brilliant lawyers who deserve to be in the judiciary, but because they don't have connections to the president and to the Judicial and
Mga
Bar Council,
fraternities there
will
and all,
never
yeah,
be.
yeah.
It's being lorded over by fraternities, basically. So we'll never. I'm sorry.
Yeah, speaking of reform.
See,
Yeah.
actually,
Honestly, it's true.
a
Patron
lot of the
system.
corruption in
Yeah.
the judiciary, I would say, is I have friends from the fraternities, but
Yeah.
a lot of it, in fact, people join fraternities for that precise reason, so
Yeah.
that someday they'll have connection to this judge, they'll
Cushion.
have connection to this prosecutor.
That's why it's been
You
so
know.
hard to abolish the fraternity system.
Exactly. Even with the anti-hazing law and even with
Yeah.
all these laws.
It's harder
you
than
know,
dynasties.
It's so
Harder to
difficult.
abolish than
It's so
dynasties.
Pero
difficult.
pareho may
Parang may
malaking overlap
May
niyan.
interface,
Oh,
may
talaga.
interface.
Oh my God.
On the other hand, you have detainees for pickpocketing that have been detained for 3 years already
Yung mga nagjujuts lang, di ba?
exactly because their case has languished, the prosecutor is always absent, the POW lawyer is always absent. So unless you make the compensation competitive, unless you're able to make the screening process more a meritocracy, more based on merits, and unless there is aggressive lifestyle checks conducted on a regular basis on these people, I don't think the judiciary will change.
That's the rule of law part of this conversation. As you said, rule of
Yes.
law matters. Strong state is also about the rule of law,
Yeah.
the non-arbitrary, the uniform and predictable application of the law in accordance with the Constitution.
Yeah, that's why maybe we need to maybe, see how China does it. No, seriously.
You really have to bring it
What I
back.
mean is that they have a
That's
very
you
sophisticated
have Hassan Piker now. It's like,
anti-corruption surveillance
yeah, but we
system.
know it was slightly politicized
No,
too.
I know,
I mean,
it's
Boshi
politicized,
Lai
but
and like,
I mean, sure. I mean,
yeah.
granted that,
But at least they had something. They did something.
and it works.
Flies and tigers.
Yeah.
We need something. Well, I mean, Indonesia had the KPK or something like that, right?
Yeah, there used to be that
Which
until,
Jokowi abolished. But maybe
Wala
we have
na.
to have something like that. Yung ICI ngayon will make a people's something in court or something like that, right? Maybe something. Last point, just to close on this. I know we can have a lot of conversation on this. Is for me, I'm very Gramscian. I'm sequential. I think we're still in the face of war of position. This is probably a disagreement I have with some friends in the groups. This is not the time for some sort of revolution or coup and all. Let's gather our forces. Let's enjoy the mutual destruction of the dark forces. Let's put pressure on one side of this equation, which is in desperate mode, negative territory, favorability, lame duck years, and use that political capital momentum for 2028. I'm still hoping that that could be the year of war of maneuver, and it cannot be just winning the presidency or the vice president or senate. It has to be multi-leveled. The progressive movement, whatever you want to call them, pink lawan, progressive, whatever, they have to be competitive at multiple levels kasi yung susunod na presidente natin has to be in a position to really implement and to be responsive, or at least have the literacy and awareness to respond to some of these important issues we raise. Otherwise, to be honest, going back to our first episode, I don't think this thing is sustainable. This political economy of ours, the pillars are collapsing.
Sure.
The growth engines are going to go away if we don't do something drastic.
Sure.
So I'm willing to give this a few more years of war of position before we make the war of maneuver. Before we go China.
No, but what I mean is that, okay, you laid out itong sequential, but there's also a very good basis for the argument that you need a third force to both
Sure.
the dark forces.
To do that, the
Sure.
Gramscian war of position maneuver. Yeah.
So, and what I'm hoping is in fact, there will be enough people that will wake up to that need, because otherwise, my sense is if you're going to favor one of these forces, you're the one who's going to lose credibility, which unfortunately, I think that is what is happening right now to keep personalities in the yellow camp.
That's your position, just to be clear.
Yeah,
I don't share that position.
Sure. But I just wanted to
But
say
that's a warning. It is a valid warning. It is a
Right.
valid warning.
I think to sort of square the circle, I think we're all in agreement. So there are ways to do it. There are ways to do it within the yellow camp. There are ways to do it outside the yellow camp. If you're within the yellow camp, I think, Richard, we're probably a bit closer to these people. It is really making sure that we hold the feet of these guys to the
Close to
fire,
the fire, yeah.
to make sure that they don't repeat the same mistakes of before. And then there are people who decide to not be part of that yellow camp and push from the outside. But that has an effect also, even
Yeah.
internally doon
Yeah.
sa yellow
Yeah.
camp, because they realize, if Walden leads a third force and then mas maraming people who are attracted to that, then the yellow camp has to respond. So there's a kind of I don't know, like there's a symbiosis
Yeah,
here,
it's a
even if you work
dialectical
inside or
relationship,
outside. The point is to force everyone into a more progressive position, regardless of what camp you're in.
And
now.
ultimately, you have to win over that 45% who are non-partisan. I mean, the surveys show
Right, yeah.
the biggest group is the non-group. The group that is not affiliated. So we have to understand how to win them over. If corruption is what's more important to them, if employment is what's, or if it's a package of that, dyan dapat nakatutok. Hindi lang for internal conversation or just for our own pleasure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Congratulations again, Lele,
Thank
for
you.
your new book.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney
Thank you.
Star.
Thank you.
That was a very
Attorney
good judgment
Star,
call.
thank you.
Thank you, Walden, for
you.
setting the tone for our next episode with Ronald Llamas. That was a very tickly way. I will send the last part of our conversation. Ronald, get the arguments ready. Let's go.
Now, excited
January
ako. Excited
4.
ako. Excited. I'm very excited to watch that. Yeah.
Because Ronald also has a very strong argument to make. The weird thing is I agree with both of you. And as Fitzgerald said, a great mind can have two contradictory ideas and remain sane. That's me with you too. On that note, thank you very much for joining us for the latest episode of Marcos and Marxism. Talagang kung saan napunta yung discussion. Catch us again in our next episode with Ronald Llamas. We'll continue this and Sensei Walden Bello. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.